Hart House for the launch of the Reimagining Music Venues event, and welcome everyone that's joining us from the live stream.
I'm Nicole.
And I'm Demi, and we're the co-chairs of the Hart House Music Committee, and we'll be your hosts for this evening.
Before we get started, we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have this opportunity to work on this land.
We've got a really exciting night ahead of us. Not only will we be celebrating the launch of the Reimagining Music Venues report, we're also going to have some live music to close the evening. There will be 2 live bands following the presentation, including Tenger, who have come all the way from South Korea and Japan and are starting their North American tour right here tonight, and Moonbeam, who hail from much closer.
The Music Committee provides a space for students with a passion for music to discuss and engage with a community that shares their interest. In providing students with concerts and other music programming, members have a unique opportunity to enhance and expand these passions alongside a growing community.
We're very excited to welcome you to the launch event for Reimagining Music Venues. This 2-year Ontario-wide study is a collaboration between Jonathan Bunce, aka Johnny Dovercourt, at Wavelength Music, and Dan Silver, Professor of Sociology at UTSC and co-lead of the Creative Community Commons at the School of Cities.
You're likely all here because you know that Ontario's live music venues are facing serious challenges. Spaces have been getting shut down all over the province for years, even before the industry was decimated by the pandemic. But new venue models are popping up all over the world, providing hope that change is possible. This extensive 96-page new report evaluates the state of live music in Ontario and whether these new models are the answer.
Our study's 2 co-authors will walk you through the report, after which we'll have an additional presentation from 2 of the U of T students that contributed to the research. And then we'll have some time for questions from the audience before we take a break and return with what we're all here to support, live music.
We'd also like to acknowledge the support of the external funders that made the Reimagine Music Venues project possible: Ontario Creates, Factor, and the Department of Canadian Heritage. We'd also like to acknowledge support for the report and this event from the Creative Communities Commons and the School of Cities, as well as Hart House for providing the space and helping us to present this launch.
And before we get started, we also want to remind you that across the hall we have a bar and some food, so make sure you stop by there. It is our pleasure to introduce our co-authors and study leads. So Jonathan Bunce is also known as Johnny Dovercourt, and he is a writer, researcher, and concert presenter who has been immersed in the Toronto independent music scene since the 90s. He is artistic and executive director of Wavelength Music, the nonprofit arts organization he co-founded in 2000. He is the author of Any Night of the Week, a DIY history of Toronto music 1957 to 2001 on Coach House Books. And he is also a U of T alumnus and has acted as senior community advisor of the Hart House Music Committee.
Dan Silver is a professor of sociology at the University of Toronto Scarborough campus and co-lead of the Creative Communities Commons at the School of Cities. His research areas are social theory, urban sociology, and cultural policy. Silver's books include Scenescapes: How Qualities of Place Shape Social Life, and The Politics of Urban Cultural Policy. He has produced a number of reports that have helped to shape policy in Chicago and Toronto, including Chicago, Music City, From the Ground Up, Growing Toronto's Cultural Sector, Reimagining Public Art in Toronto, and Community Voices, a study into what residents value in Toronto's inner suburbs.
Please welcome Johnny and Dan to the stage.
Thanks, Nicole and Demi. I'm gonna go around this way. How's everyone doing? Thanks for coming. It's great to see you all here. As our lovely hosts from Hart House mentioned, there is a bar. It's an arts policy launch event with a bar. So I think that's all something we can cheer. So yes, thanks for coming again. I'm going to start out by telling you a bit about the genesis of Reimagining Music Venues. At the start of the pandemic, I published a book called Any Night of the Week that was a history of the Toronto music scene, going back to the 1950s. And it was a view of the past and the evolution of the music scene here in our great city of Toronto. And at the start of the pandemic, when with all the venues shut down, it really got me thinking about what's the future of these spaces. Because a key thesis of the book was the importance of small venues in terms of infrastructure that really nurtured the local music scene. And I was interested in dipping my toes into policy waters, so I reached out to Dan. We had worked together on the From the Ground Up study back around 2011, and so we kicked off this collaboration. It's been 2 years in the making, and we're really excited to share our findings with you. Hopefully, while waiting, you've had a chance to absorb our executive summary. There's a lot of components to this study. It's not just another music industry report. It's sort of a unique hybrid academic and sectoral research project. And it takes an ecosystem view of live music in Ontario. And it's not just a Toronto study. We're talking about cities across the province. 2 teams of student researchers contributed. There was a lot of different components. There was a major stakeholder survey, interviews, field research, focus groups, a review of existing literature, and some really innovative data analysis. But we started out with one key hypothesis, which is that the standard bar model of live music in Ontario, wherein the venues get their revenue from bar sales, artists and promoters get their revenue from door ticket sales, themselves, what do we want to keep, and what do we want to fix or improve upon? So I'm going to invite Dan up here to set the stage.
Thanks, Johnny. Okay. Get a look at what things were like prior to COVID. I mean, we really can think of COVID as a break point, obviously, in history, in all sorts of different dimensions. And what we wanted to do is see what were things like in the sector prior to COVID, and to what extent are the challenges in the sector sort of structural? What are things that were already there? What were the challenges that were happening, and what things were caused by the pandemic, and what things were exacerbated, what things pushed things further in the direction they were already going. And to do that, we were very fortunate to have some nice people at Exclaim and Just Shows, and I think someone from Exclaim is here, so thank you very much. And they gave us access to some of their back-end listings data. We're able to put that together and see some trends, as you see in these charts, in the number of active venues. So this is a venue with any shows in a month over time. And the main message from both of these, the tan line at the top is Toronto, and the other lines are other cities. And most of what happens in Ontario is driven by what happens in Toronto, although you can see some interesting contrasts here and there. And the reason it's so kind of jagged here and there, that's like the raw data. So it's sort of like you can see the seasonal fluctuations, and those smooth lines are just smoothing it out so you see the overall patterns. And the message across both data sources and for both the number of active venues and for the total shows is that we had a peak around the mid-2010s, 2015, 2017, depending on where you look at it from different sources. And it was already in decline at that time, so pre-COVID. But it didn't happen everywhere like that. If you look at some of them, for example, the pink line is Montreal, and you can see Montreal has had steady increases since the mid-2010s, both in venues and in total shows. Even as that's been happening in Toronto, again, the tan line is Toronto, the percentage of sold-out shows hit a peak and has been going down in the years prior to COVID. Same with the average ticket prices. They've gone up steadily in Toronto since the early 2010s, even as they've come down in other places. While that was happening, these are data, again, about where venues were at and the number of shows going on prior to COVID. We continued to see a massive concentration of venues and shows. So the right side is the bubble sizes are scaled by the number of shows. So bigger bubble, that's places where we had more shows. And you can just see how concentrated things are in the West End. We know that just by anecdotal experience, but seeing it visually is pretty striking. And one thing that, of course, this correlates is these are the places that have had some of the biggest increases in rents in the entire country. And when we look at it in more depth statistically, you can see that's perhaps the biggest driver of these declines in the number of shows and the number of active venues going on in these places. So this is one of the big challenges facing the sector, concentration in a few parts of the city, other parts of the city that don't have as much access, and we're looking at ways to move forward there. The other thing we did from a sort of innovative data kind of point of view is we wanted to see, okay, how do people actually talk about music venues, and to what extent does that tell you something about which places ended up staying open and which places ended up shutting down during COVID? And so I happen to have been doing a project prior to COVID, and we downloaded all of Yelp in 2019. And when we did that, we downloaded all the music venues in Toronto at the time, and we were able to extract from that every review written about every single music venue in Toronto as of 2019 on Yelp. And we're able to use a statistical technique that's called topic modeling. I won't go into the details, but what it allows you to do is see words that can recurrently come together. So if people typically talk about certain venues and they say, good, fun, friends, ambiance, sound, right? You'll see that as a pattern. Of course, it's better to read it yourself and understand what it means. At the same time, when you're looking at thousands and thousands and thousands of reviews, you can't do that. So we can see these general patterns. And from that, we can see the typical ways people talk about venues. And it turns out it was strikingly predictive of the venues who ended up staying open and the ones who closed. And Johnny will tell you a bit more about that.
Tell us how you really feel. I just wanted to say that Dan said this really fast, but they downloaded all of Yelp. Just absorb that for a sec. The review site Yelp, they downloaded the whole thing, and that was a data source that we had access to. Yeah, so this is a really fun piece of the report. As Dan was saying, so we were able to, using topic modeling, analyze the most common topics by keyword in Yelp reviews of all the businesses in Toronto that were categorized as a music venue. And we used that to establish these 12 types of venue. Oh, here they are. So some places are a good place to see a show. Others are a fun place to go dancing. Others are pair food and music well. And then some places get bad reviews. Over here, bad vibes. Usually the bad reviews came from a bad vibe from security or staff or even just other attendees. And then we ranked the top venues, the top 20 venues in each category in Toronto. And so what was interesting was to compare this with which venues survived the pandemic and which didn't. So in the category of nice venue, that was one of my favorites, places with good sound, good sight lines, places that were maybe visually stunning, all but one of them survived. But if you look at Fun Times Dancing, and if you look at Good Showplace Chill Edition, 45% of the venues in these two categories all closed. So this really highlights how small bars and clubs, which make up all these closures on these two lists, are really in a precarious state. These are places that might have been beloved by their audiences or attendees or their local community, but that wasn't enough to save them. So we're seeing here that some venues are too nice to fail. It's the larger halls, or we're probably more able to access government subsidies during the pandemic, or maybe they had financial reserves to fall back on. The small operators are mostly operating in these really razor-thin margins, so they are the ones that were more likely to close and did. So during one element of our survey, which Dan will tell you more about in a bit, looked at the impact of COVID, and we captured the mood of the music scene in the early days of reopening in the spring of 22. One silver lining of the pandemic was new access to public funding. But this really benefited venue operators and show presenters more than it did artists. Like some artists saw benefits in terms of additional time for creation or presenters exploring virtual shows, but it really just made people miss the live experience more. So today we see really little appetite to return to those days of live streaming. It's also an Ontario-wide study, as I mentioned. And one element of this was these scene reports. I did some field research and visited other cities around the province, like Hamilton, Guelph, and Ottawa, for instance, to really take the temperature of these scenes, go to shows, talk to people involved in the music community, find out how they felt about things, especially in that time period of reopening when things were, a little hesitant or, people were unsure of the future. And so some really interesting themes emerged. One of them was that one city, Ottawa, really showed, went against the trend of concentration that we saw in the rest of the province. Ottawa is one city where we saw venues spread in neighborhoods throughout the city. So that's what was really one interesting trend that came out of this.
All right, so we did a lot of our study was based on a really extensive stakeholder survey that we did, distributed by Wavelength, we got a good response. We really tried to reach out all over the province. We had over 350 responses across the categories you see on the left. We had artists, we had presenters, we had owner-operators, we had audience members, and of course people could span all of those roles. We had good representation across genres. The demographics of our survey sample are pretty close to the demographics of Ontario, so we're getting a good read on, I think, the state of people who really have a stake in the music sector. And we learned a lot from it. One of the first set of questions we tried to ask people about is, what do you think is really important in venues? And we wanted to ask people what they saw, what they thought about the venues around them in their neighborhoods and in their communities. I won't go through the details of these graphics, trust me about what they say, but there's a few key takeaways that from these two graphics we've just looked at. When we look at the things people say what they really valued in venues, there's broadly speaking two types of things. There's the music, and in particular finding something new or having a very intimate special relationship with an artist. And then there's all the contributions that the music venue makes to the broader public and to the broader community. People really pick those things out, contributing to the vitality of the neighborhood, being a repository for memories of the community. Those are really important, and that's what we call in the social sciences quasi-public goods often. That's important in this context because that's the sort of basis for public policy support in many situations. In other words, it's not just that people have a good time at a music venue, but it's contributing something to the broader public, and we see that really reflected here. The other thing is we look at what people perceive about the venues around them. There's widespread agreement, that's on this graph, the far left, that venues are threatened across roles, across the owners, across the presenters, across the audience, across the musicians. There's a sense of threat. There's also a sense that among most of those roles that current venues are not as accessible as they could be. They're not sustainable as they could be, both ecologically and also business-wise. At the same time, there's a fair amount of disagreement about how much they reflect the diversity of communities. This is in place for ongoing conversation in the community. These are other ways that we got at these through very generous. This is kind of a good survey, by the way, when people really give these writing comments with a lot of generosity. We got tons of words on that. So part of the report is we really dig into that and we let people speak about these things in their own voices. Another thing we asked about that was very important to us was the perception of barriers, challenges across those roles and what could be done to mitigate them. And one of the big themes of this is that we see kind of different parts of the sector kind of grinding against one another in various ways. So we asked people, what are the top 3 barriers? So to even get in there is pretty high bar. We gave a lot of options. So is this one of your top 3 barriers? Over 60% of audience members said high ticket costs was one of their biggest barriers. At the same time, over half of artists and promoters saw lack of guaranteed compensation as their biggest barrier. On the other hand, the owners and operators really thought costs were too high, citing insurance, rent, inflation, and noise complaints, as well as shrinking audiences. For their part, artists and presenters thought there wasn't enough booking opportunities for them, but owners and operators thought audition for the same bands. And while all that's going on, over 30% of audience members thought that they couldn't find the genres being performed in the audiences, in the venues that they want. And many feel like they're not seeing the kind of music they want to hear. Musicians feel like they're being paid too little. And owners and operators feel like their costs are too high. Consumers are worried about shows selling out too quickly, but producers are worried they can't sell their shows, can't draw an audience. Overall, we've got a sector that is clearly generating value to the broader public, but it's not in a position to capture that. At the same time, some 20% of the artists and the presenters saw this model that has come to dominate the sector around the bar model that Johnny was just talking about as a real problem. And from all of that, the main takeaway is that there's some innovation or some entrepreneurship or some openness to new models needed. And so that was the next part of our survey, surveying openness to new models.
Thanks, Dan. So now that we know how broken the economic system is for live music, we had to ask, can we fix it? Of course, this study doesn't offer any cure-all solutions, but it does suggest some new models for live music in Ontario. Not necessarily to replace the old bar model, but to complement and enhance it. So in our survey, we saw an appetite for experimentation and exploring alternatives, whether it be publicly owned spaces like libraries or private outdoor spaces like parking lots. But we saw the least enthusiasm across the different roles from venue operators, which maybe isn't surprising. They maybe want to maintain the status quo, but it also maybe speaks to experience because they do know what works. But when it came to the features of new venue models, there was across the board not much enthusiasm for techno-utopian solutions. Like almost no one wants a VR experience integrated into their concerts, at least not in the sort of more DIY stakeholders that might respond to a survey like this one. People want more of the traditional venue experience, but delivered in new, fresh ways, and in simply higher quality. And a few respondents summarize this as good sound and clean bathrooms. So putting together our findings, our report proposes 5 new types of venue model in 3 categories. The first category relates to downtown concentration and taking music outside of its traditional locations. One idea is a mobile stage, or what we call a stage truck. You'll hear more about that later. The other is everywhere is a venue, more of a conceptual idea of music happening anywhere in public space. Parks, rooftops, beaches, like these folks did in Hamilton. There's a great independent promoter called Fort Elgin, who also did a concert at the Gage Park Greenhouse in Hamilton. The second category is making live music a component of a cultural center and in an affordable, accessible, community-based way that you see pretty much everywhere in Europe, either alongside other.
This is the part of the report. I have a few recommendations about how to go forward. What do we mean by consolidation? So we spent a weekend or two finding all of the music policy reports we could get our hands on, written in Ontario over the past decade. You see them on the right. There's a lot of them. That's about 14, I think. And across the left, you see that across all of them, there's recurrent recommendations. So we ranked them. Which ones appear in the most of those reports? So the top is the most common, and then on the way down. So this is a good list of a starting point. It's what people keep coming back to over and over and over again when they think about that. So this consolidation step is a key step. We've been thinking about this now for 8 years, 10 years in this province. Let's put those together, do something with it. But in this policy area, as in many other policy areas, there's not much evaluation. There's a lot of ideas floating out there. One city does this and looks to another city and says, well, they did that, they did that, they did that, they did that. We should do it, but does it work? Almost nobody asks. And we should find out. Now, how can we find out? The way we find out is data. We need the right kind of data, and we need a lot of it. So one of our proposals is to move towards evaluation, is to create a live music ecosystem observatory. It'd be a great opportunity for partnerships between the sector and the universities. And with that kind of database, granular, over time, like we did here, but gathering together all sorts of other data sources, we can actually ask and answer important questions, like cities around this province and around the world are creating music offices. What makes them effective? Is there certain funding levels, certain staffing levels that make them more or less effective? We can figure that out, go beyond anecdote to knowledge. The ecosystem, we can ask and we can answer that with the right data. Then we move to implementation. Okay, what are the things that we can do? And we try to have some proposals that are both like shovel ready, so to speak. You could pick this up and you can do it tomorrow. And then we try to have some, some vision types of things. One of them that we think is shovel ready right now is the stage truck, and you'll hear more about that later after this presentation. I just want to say the reason why this is the kind of thing we think is important to do and maybe to do now is that concentration of venues that you saw on that map earlier. We have so much happening in a few parts of this elsewhere. How can we get things happening in those other parts of the city? Experiment with different kinds of musical forms, the way we have with food trucks, where entrepreneurs can open up somewhere, see what works, see where they might want to establish something in brick and mortar, and then try something else. This is a way to do that and to make that happen now.
Another exciting idea that came out of the policy recommendations, exciting to arts policy nerds like me, is to create a new provincial charitable organization. We call this the Ontario Space for Music Foundation. We can't expect government to fund everything, but for many arts groups, especially smaller arts organizations, it's really hard to access private sector revenue. That means everything that's not a government grant or earned revenue like ticket sales. This is the hardest kind of revenue for most small arts presenters to access. Most of them don't have the fundraising capacity to generate private donations on their own. If you look at high art organizations like your symphonies or ballets, they have entire departments that are dedicated to raising donations. So this hypothetical foundation could essentially act as a shared platform to raise funds for a network of smaller, more grassroots spaces across the province, potentially also offer them operational support. There's a lot of more, financially well-off people these days whose taste might not lean towards the symphony or the ballet. They might want to support hip-hop or indie rock or electronic music or things that are more diverse or grassroots. The idea of the OSMF is creating an opportunity for private donations to benefit a wide range of DIY and grassroots organizations. We think it's time to support adaptive reuse of potentially city-run spaces rather than building more sparkly white elephants. Continuing the topic of funding, because we can have all these great, amazing, creative ideas, but we do need to figure out how we're going to pay for them. We recommend that policymakers examine new funding models to support live music. Agencies like Factor have had huge success developing the Canadian recording industry over the last 40 years. But nowadays, it's touring and performance where artists generate most of their income. During the pandemic, we saw unprecedented new support for music venues, which were previously ineligible for government grants. So it's worth examining how we can build on the success of those recovery programs going forward. Some operators that we spoke to said this funding literally saved their business.
So, like I said, we spent a weekend reading 14 Ontario music policy reports. And while they had a lot of great ideas in them, and they were very concrete, and many of them were actionable, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as the best way to spend your weekend. And one thing that they, in a way, were sort of, like say, they could have used a little bit more of is what we call in the biz, the vision thing. And I think that's a big part of the takeaway of the report. We need a vision that brings people together and makes people think they're all part of the same thing, reaching for something big. And the small things add up to something more than the sum of their parts. Now, what could that be? We don't know, but one idea is this on the slide, the Cultural Renaissance 2.0. Some of you may remember Cultural Renaissance 1.0. Some of you may not be old enough to remember that. What was it? Well, it was a big initiative that came from a combination of all levels of government, federal government, provincial government supported with about $250 million, supported in many other ways by the municipal governments, and then generating other philanthropic donations to the high arts organizations. They do have philanthropic support from the government. Legacies from that, and they were geared towards a certain vision of culture, which they defined at the time as making Toronto into a cultural Camelot. That was the way it was described. Now, it was a success in all sorts of ways, but it's time to build on that success and try something else. Cultural Renaissance 2.0, the democratic version, democratizing the vision of Cultural Renaissance 1.0. If 1.0 was about large, iconic architecture by Starchitects, 2.0 would be about repurposing and animating existing spaces, integrating culture into new kinds of mixed-use projects. 1.0 was about attracting globe-trotting tourists to the downtown. 2.0 would encourage residents to explore the cities, neighborhoods, and scenes that make their city an interesting place together, all the different voices of the sector who are interested in building an ecosystem that's healthy top to bottom.
And as a last note, I want to remind everyone here, it starts with you. The city isn't going to fix the music scene for you, or for any of us. Bring governments on board as our partners. So that means pitch in, join a board, donate to a nonprofit, and support the scene. Go to small venues and buy merch from local artists. And if you haven't already, you can download the report from the URL on the screen. There'll be a QR code later. So thanks again, everyone, for coming. This is the end of the first part of the presentation. We'd now like to introduce our two students who worked on the study as part of the MUCP Multidisciplinary Urban Capstone Project at the School of Cities for their fourth-year undergraduate project. They're going to tell you a bit about this stage truck concept. Please welcome Shuli Smolyanitsky and Sophie Sondhelm.
Thanks so much, Johnny, and good evening, everyone. We're so pleased to share our work on the stage truck with you tonight. We thought it'd be nice to start by bringing back this map of live music venues in Toronto because it points to the kind of geographic interventions that alternative music venue models can help to achieve. And as just one of several in the report, we see the stage truck as a way to help to rethink the landscape of live music, to push it beyond downtown clusters. And we do that with an agile, appealing, and accessible production enhancement tool for artists and presenters. But before we begin, we'd just like to acknowledge that the stage truck feasibility study was made possible by the School of Cities Multidisciplinary Urban Capstone Project. And we would like to thank Dr. Dan Silver and Johnny Bunce for their mentorship throughout our project. And we'd also like to acknowledge two of our other colleagues, Choru Sharma and Callie McDonald. My name is Shalise Malyanitsky. I'm currently a master's student in the Department of Geography and Planning here at U of T.
And I'm Sophie Sontelm, a recent U of T grad, now working in management consulting during the week and emerging artist support on weekends.
So in broad strokes, we developed the design proof in the context of Toronto, but it is meant as a generalizable model for the various communities that make up Ontario's music ecosystem. And at its core, the concept of the stage truck is, of course, not totally novel. There are a variety of outdoor mobile stages, such as the ones you might see at a concert or festival, as well as performance-use vehicles. But the stage truck goes a bit further to consider how a music venue can be a resource to specifically DIY, grassroots, and nonprofit actors. So we'll talk a little bit about the business case for the stage truck, including the market scan and some of the financial details, as well as the truck package itself, the operating model, as in its amenities. We'll chat a bit about the policy and placemaking tools, and we'll also discuss, given that the stage truck is currently in its conceptual phase, a few of the potential operating models that we envision for the stage truck. A little better. Anyhow, in terms of the business case for the stage truck, we first conducted a market scan, which showed a polarity between the existing available options in Ontario. So on one hand, we found what are called showmobiles. These are essentially trailers with a fold-out stage and a basic PA. A few municipalities in Ontario, as well as elsewhere in Canada and in North America more broadly, offer this. They are pretty affordable. They tend to be used primarily for group performances like dancing or non-amplified sound like a symphonic band. And at the other end are the professional grade but also quite costly rental stages out there, such as the Stage Line 50 or Stage Line 100. These usually you might see as a smaller stage as part of a festival or as a main stage. Nevertheless, its cost tends to put it out of reach for a lot of the stakeholders that we spoke to. And so the stage truck occupies a middle ground between the more rudimentary models and the higher end options, and this informed our entire process.
Moving slightly more into the ideation and design stages of our project, we wanted to ensure we could test the stage truck's financial viability, so we looked at some upfront, variable, and fixed costs. This was all based on stakeholder engagement, so we got industry-recommended AV tech lists, freelance tech wages, et cetera, to really try and ensure we could make this space come to life and be competitively priced for artists. So we looked at several different ownership and operating scenarios. For example, kind of speaking to some of Johnny's points earlier, perhaps the stage truck could be publicly owned by the city, or maybe it's funded by a joint public-private partnership. And then we moved into looking at different operating models, and we came up with 3 different scenarios. The first is a free use model, so the stage truck could be used at no cost to the artist. The second is a cost recovery model, so we'll set a break-even time period and then base the stage truck's rental price on that. And the last is a competitively market-based price model, And in that one, we rely on the market scan that Shuli just spoke to. And then we wanted to do some cost projections to see, could this be a real thing? So we took 3 and 5 year break-even scenarios and found that the truck breaks even in both of those time frames and can be offered at a rental rate that is 2/3 our figures, added in some conservative cost buffers, and it still stands up. So we're excited. And we also that the stage truck offers an attractive and flexible package to artists. It's meant to be a plug-and-play stage to the greatest possible extent, and we're going to show you some more in the upcoming cross-sections. So, imagine you're in a 6-piece band. Yes, we're doing this. We're doing this. You pull up to our fully serviced portable venue, and all you need to bring are yourselves and your instruments, but we do have a drum kit in place with breakable items too. The tech on site will green room with your friends, your band members, your family, and then you can enter the truck through the rear, and there's an accessibility ramp there too. You're ready to perform at that point, and then moving into something slightly more serious in terms of the aesthetics. Based on our stakeholder feedback, we looked for ways to make the truck as customizable as possible, and 2 really accessible ways that we did that was to have black drapes as the background, so you can bring your own decor, like a banner, for example, and it will really pop against that. We also have a disco ball for fun. And lastly, we're in Ontario, so the stage is sheltered and designed with inclement weather in mind.
And so moving beyond the vehicle's physical design, there were these and intangible benefits that we identified with the stage truck, and one of these includes the potential to support presenters and artists by reducing the costs and logistical workloads that are often associated with live music production. So to picture one example, by booking at the stage truck a grassroots presenter that would normally have to source out and procure all of the gear and equipment needed to DIY a stage, they can instead allocate a greater portion of their budget towards artist fees, sports, and also spend more time of their more time and funds on programming, on marketing, basically anything besides just building a stage that's up for a day or a few. And alongside a whole set of interventions that you will find in the report, the stage truck can help to advance industry-wide goals around accessibility, equity, and inclusion. And while the stage truck's physical features address the tangible needs of presenters and artists in terms of what you need to put on a show, we're also mindful of the fact that its full potential is not inherent to its physical form. And something we heard from stakeholders crucially was that the policies and regulations, much of the finer print around the stage truck can be a real make it or break it factor. And this includes questions on eligibility criteria. How do we actually ensure that the stage truck is available to those who will benefit the most from it? This also includes questions around booking policies, such as how do you manage demand if it exceeds the truck's availability in a given season, and also questions around permitting and access to space. How does one actually get the stage truck into those spaces around the city that will best serve its users and audiences? And so the answer to this, to these sometimes hard-hitting questions will really depend on the operating model of the stage truck, whether it's a public resource under private ownership, a social enterprise model, or somewhere in between. And so the feasibility study we performed includes a policy and programming toolkit, and it pictured the stage truck under these different scenarios, which was informed by our stakeholder engagement. And we are also energized by the precedent for this venue model in the post-pandemic context. So at the exact same time as we were working on the stage truck here in Toronto, a group of architecture students at the University of Nebraska, alongside a set of community partners with very similar ambitions to ours, actually built the Omaha Mobile Stage. So you can see a photo now. It just completed its second season as a portable performance space. And the Omaha Mobile Stage is operated by a local nonprofit. It has a mandate around creative placemaking, and they've also staged shows with an equity inclusion lens in the context of the Omaha community. And interestingly, it also has a workforce training component, so youth can intern with the Omaha Mobile Stage to gain live event production experience, which we found very exciting.
We're really excited, as Julie said, about the future of the stage truck, and we really encourage you to check out the wider Reimagining Music Venues report if you want to dive deeper. We'll now hand it back to Johnny and Dan.
Let's hear it again for Shuli and Sophie, and Charu is here as well. So now it's your turn. We're gonna, it's your moment to shine. We're gonna have a Q&A now. I'm gonna open the floor to questions. Does anyone here have a question for either myself or Dan or Shuli and Sophie about the stage truck? Go ahead. So the question was related to the truck and its fossil fuel impact, and as we sort of evolve into this new culture of music making and music presentation, can we also evolve a new culture of sustainability? I am on the board, disclosure, I'm on the board of Music Declares Emergency Canada, No Music on a Dead Planet, so this is the topic that's really important to me. And the organization that I'm on the board of is definitely working towards furthering the conversation about climate change within the music industry. And touring is one of the biggest fossil fuel emitters, though the largest emitter within the music industry is actually audience travel to events is the biggest source of carbon emissions. But I think we talked a bit about exploring a hybrid or electric truck option. Do you folks want to respond to that?
Yeah, we've definitely looked into it a bit, especially as we were rereading our report from prior years, and it's something that I think would be top of mind for anyone to take on this project. But
so actually, the first question is also related to the stage truck. While we're on that topic, how did you come up with the idea of the stage truck?
It was somewhat of a circuitous process because we kind of approached it with a general idea of what can music venues look like in a post-pandemic context as part of, you know, a great reset that was, I think, dominating, I think, the discourse around arts policy during the pandemic. And I mean, it really took a couple of months just trying to find all over the world interesting ideas, unique venues. So there was a pretty extensive literature review, but we also wanted it to have a local relevance. And so we had seen a couple of, or really just one experimental vehicle firm in the US that builds a mobile stage. It hadn't been marketed much, but it was offered by a company as a prototype, and we started thinking about how a performance use vehicle would be useful in a local context, and then we had a pretty intensive stakeholder engagement process with artists and presenters, as well as other folks representing the grassroots music community who offered incredible input to the design, what they would actually need, how they envisioned utilizing this resource. That pretty much was our process, yeah.
Can I add, I want to add one thing to that, because this happened as part of a program at the School of Cities at U of T called the Multidisciplinary Urban Capstone Program. And it's a program that works through, in a very structured way, a design process that, while we have amazing students, it's structured to help them to generate good ideas, and more often than not, it does. And I want to say a bit more about it because it may be something that's of interest to people here or people on the live stream. If you are a part of an organization and you have some questions, like say some policy questions or design questions, some challenges or problems in your organization that maybe go beyond your capacity or something that might benefit from this, there's always an application process, and you can get great students like this, work with professors as supervisors. That's what Johnny did here on this process, and they're going to generate really good ideas out of it because it's structured in such a way that more often than not, it does. So consider applying. We're always looking for interesting organizations that would like to be a part of it.
Thanks, Dan. Any more questions from within the room? I guess we covered everything, I guess. Okay. It is a 96 page. Oh, second back row. For those who couldn't hear, the question was, what is Ottawa doing right in terms of the venues being more dispersed around the neighborhoods of the city compared to Scarborough, where our questioner grew up, myself as well, where there were basically no music venues that either of us could experience growing up. I think we had to hypothesize a little bit as to the reasons for the way Ottawa is laid out the way it is, and I think that it has to do. I mean, Dan, I'd love to hear your two cents, but I think it has to do with Ottawa's relatively compact urban form, and that you see it has all these neighborhoods like Centertown or the Glebe or it's coming to me. The one in the Hintonburg, thank you. It was like the top of my. These neighborhoods are all actually fairly accessible to downtown, even as sort of some of them are within walking distance of downtown. And I think that Ottawa has a pretty established civil servant commuter culture. So people are more likely to go to work downtown and then come home and go out in their own neighborhoods. So I think that's the key difference. In the inner suburbs in Toronto, for whatever reason, there's just been a culture of going downtown for your entertainment and coming home to, whatever, watch TV or play sports or whatever is a more likely a recreational activity in the inner suburbs has been what's developed. What's your 2 cents, Dan?
Everybody knows here that at least 2 members of Johnny's immediate family are professional geographers, right? So I work in Scarborough too, and I spend a lot of time there. And here's some, I don't want to get it exactly wrong, but my colleagues in transport geography will show you graphs that, and statistics that I think show that for most parts of Scarborough, to get from one part to the other, not even very far by physical distance, it's faster to get there often by walking or cycling than transit, okay? So we talked about our live music ecosystem approach. Obviously, live music is embedded in a bigger ecosystem, which is the city as a whole and beyond. So a lot of the problems or challenges that we see in the sector are embedded in housing affordability, are embedded in transit policy, and that we can't disconnect them one from the other. So, and the other part is Scarborough is a borough of Toronto, but it was its own city not that long ago, and it was a suburb in many ways, and now it's an inner suburb, and so we're part of a long-run evolutionary process, let's say, where we're figuring out how to knit what was separate together into one, and it's been going on for about 20 years. I think hopefully we'll get there, but part of that getting there is adding in the transit systems, having more centers of activity that people can get to by various modes, and having different say, generations being there that have a different set of expectations about what they want from their neighborhoods around them. So we'll get there, we hope. This kind of conversation is one way that we can move in that direction.
Another point, too, that occurred to me is that zoning is a factor. Until now, it's actually not been possible to open a nightclub in any part of the city outside of downtown. Obviously, you know, live music presenters actually have been doing their own workarounds for years. Most of the venues that you go to actually are probably licensed as a restaurant and are only supposed to use 6% of their floor space for entertainment. But now the city is actually in the process of, it's gone through a comprehensive night economy review in the last year or two, I believe, and there's actually currently new draft bylaws that you can read on the city website that will sort of bring some of these zoning licensing and zoning bylaws into the 21st century, including making nightclubs legal across the whole megacity. Let's go back to our lovely live stream, folks. Okay. Anything jump out to you here, Dan?
Which one are you looking at?
These are all the questions from live stream. Someone from the live stream says, I would love to hear more about genre differences in the kind of alternative models this report proposes. I think that we didn't really get that much into genre. I think we're trying to keep it open-ended. I think that sometimes there's maybe an assumption that live music means bands. I think we definitely took a sort of genre-agnostic approach, which is very in line with the spirit of Wavelength. And for me, live music includes DJs. It's really anywhere where music is the focus, where it's not sort of piped into the background like you'd see at a restaurant or a cafe or a pub. So really, we're viewing these kind of adaptations as something that can really apply to anyone, to bands in all genres and DJs in all genres. You know, the idea of the DJ is definitely sort of more participatory in terms of the focus being dancing rather than standing and listening. Obviously, you can dance to bands, but that's sometimes not. It's in Toronto, not always the focus.
We did ask about what genres people like the most or identified with in the survey. We didn't look specifically about correlations between those and people's attitudes towards these venue models, the options that we gave them. That's a good idea. I think I'll take a look, I'll take a look tonight or tomorrow and crack open the survey data and maybe I'll get back.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that Dan was really breaking some new ground with this technique of using concert listings as a data source. And it was really great in terms of telling us like the number of shows and how many shows sold out and those and lots of different data fields. But one thing that we couldn't get it to tell us is which artists were in which genre. It was just too complicated to be able to do that sort of level of categorization and sorting. Someone I think had a question over here. So the question was about all ages shows and what we're seeing in terms of developing the opportunity for artists to grow their audience or audiences to grow their exposure to music, if I'm paraphrasing a bit. Did we see that come out in the study? I think it was something that it was commented on a lot. There was discussion about it. I think there was definitely sort of across the board interest in it. It didn't end up becoming a major factor in the report, but I definitely think it's important in terms of that pipeline, right? So the pipeline, obviously, like my organization, Wavelength, prioritizes, we pretty much only do all ages shows now. In terms of accessibility, it's really important. Maybe getting into the weeds here a bit as a presenter, often if you want to put on an all ages show, there will be an additional cost to you from the venue, because the venue has to hire more security. They're worried about their liquor license. For most venues, if they lose their liquor license or they get in trouble with it, they're going to go out of business. So that's the main reason why you see a lot of hesitancy among some licensed venues to present all ages shows. Or if they do it, there's an additional cost. So again, it's back to the sort of how do you fund it model. It's one of those things that requires an additional way to fund that, because for venues, it's a risk and an additional cost and expense to present an all ages show. Hi, Stuart. So it's sort of more of a suggestion about business BIAs, local BIAs, and business improvement association as being a potential funder for something like the stage truck. And yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And I know local BIAs have contributed to a lot of street festivals in Toronto, like the Do Us Fest on Dundas, and it definitely seems like that would be a natural fit and something that. One of those sources, like myself speaking as a presenter, like BIAs are one of those kind of hidden funding sources that are definitely worth exploring and can do that kind of investment in local community, because that's really what it's about, right? Is about art and music and culture really animates the city and makes it a better place to live.
We had, if I recall, a pretty robust discussion of BIAs in the Everywhere's a Venue part too. It's a great idea to link it to the stage truck. I don't think we put that together, but various ways that it might be possible for BIAs, if not to collaborate with one another, because sometimes that's tricky, but sometimes not, but to pool resources and knowledge, so each one doesn't have to rediscover the wheel over and over again. So and we go through some various actionable ways that they could do that, learn ways to move forward on that front.
I'm going to grab one more question from the chat. Remuneration for the artists. What about virtual tip jar QR systems like eTip? I think that's a great question, because that is, unlike the food truck, that is one of the challenges with the stage truck is you're not going out there to sell food. You're offering up performances, usually free. Adding in some gated element for collecting tickets is a challenge. So for me, I do see it as something that would need to be funded, and then the artist fees would be part of it. It would be part of a program that would offer artist fees as a component, along with the sort of the production enhancement that the stage truck would be. That's how I would see it rolling out.
I think we had another question from someone with a hat.
Was there a question towards the back over here?
Yeah.
Hello. You were at that show? You were not there. That's an excellent question. I was thinking about it earlier. Do you mind if I take this one? I have a funny story, actually. I was thinking about this, I was reminded of this earlier. Next door is University College, which is my alma mater, and there's a cafe there called Diablo's in the junior common room where I spent a lot of my undergrad days working at the student newspaper, The Gargoyle, in the basement, and we had Diablo's late night. And at some point, I think maybe in fourth year, I convinced the person that ran Diablo's late night to let me book bands. And they said, sure. And so we had one show went really well. Spooky Reuben and Picola played. I think this was like 1996. And then we had another show, the second show. Matt Galloway wrote about it in Now magazine. And he said, indie music invades the University of Toronto campus. The UC Dean read it, and they shut down the show. Yeah, they didn't want people from off campus coming and invading student-oriented programming. I'd like to think that 25 years later, plus, things have changed. I actually had a really positive conversation with someone at Hart House about potentially there being a music series here this summer. Not to get, let's not get our hopes up, but I think that the times have changed. The Hart House music community is doing a great, music committee is doing a great job. I think there's definitely sort of probably more of a shift on campus in terms of seeing more arts programming that's integrated with the community. I would love to see that happen because, especially just in terms of the spaces that you see on campus, at U of T, for example, are just fantastic and not really known about by people who aren't part of the university community. So I think we should find a way to make that happen.
Don't forget UTSC as well. I mean, there's a lot of, if we're talking about places in Scarborough, that could be a real launching point for having a lot more going on. UTSC would be a great one. We have had in the past, I was one of the faculty supervisors of like a kind of mini Nuit Blanche there that was very successful. It's called Art Side Out. So there's precedent for that. It's a challenge, but I think right now there's a good moment for it. So that's a great question. I'm going to go back to you at UTSC and see if I can find some students and see if we can make it happen.
I think I saw National Velvet at UTSC when I was still in high school. That's a deep cut Toronto late 80s alt rock reference. Any more questions from the floor? Yeah. That's a great question. I think that someone has to start it, right? And I think that the Music Venue Trust is a great example. And there's but 2 or 3 pages about Music Venue Trust in our report, and I got to interview a couple of the staffers to find out how they did it. I mean, it really was charities sort of don't descend from the sky. They're not created by the government. It's concerned citizens that come together to make it happen. There's a guy called Mark David who is the founder of Music Venue Trust, and he wanted it to be the equivalent of the National Trust, but for grassroots music venues. So I think in terms of this OSMF, really a group of people just need to come together and start it. I mean, the process of a charitable can be a long one, but can take a year and a half. But really, I think it just takes the commitment of time. You've seen things like the Unison Benevolent Fund start up in Ontario within the last 5 years and generate a lot of success in terms of generating funds for support for mental health for musicians. So I think that's a really great example of a local success story, and maybe if it's something that you're interested in getting involved with, I mean, I think that someone like Unison would be great to speak to.
I think that's a place too where the kind of having the global or wider comparative base is very helpful, I think, as we go forward. One of my areas of research is just policymaking in general. And one thing, we study cities all around the world, and if I was going to characterize Toronto's attitude towards policymaking, now this is more general, is broadly speaking what we call sort of outward-looking and comparative. People will do things more here if they look at other places and say, they're doing it too. We don't want to fall behind. We want to keep up. That's what motivates people. So having stories like that where we see, isn't that shocking? Do we not have that? and seeing enough of those like that, that's what motivates people here. It doesn't motivate people everywhere, but that's the policy-making culture here. So building up those stories, having that broader comparative perspective in a way, like looking outward, helps us to look inward at the same time. So I think that's an important way to move forward too.
Gentleman in the ball cap. The question was about the timing of live music events, and this fellow was sharing that I think at the venue that you might be involved with, or you're seeing like an early and a late show. The early show might be more of a rock band or live band, and a late show is more of a DJ or a club event. How do we see timing and hours of shows factor in?
I don't think we had that in the data. So
I think that audiences, it was for audiences.
Some people did ask. Some people did say they thought it was too late. They thought it was too early, and it was
a barrier.
I think,
for
some
audiences.
and some cities too. Where was it? It was like.
Was it London?
London. They thought everything was too late. I think that's what I can't remember. Don't quote me on that one. We have to look.
Yeah, I was having this conversation with an early attendee tonight, and I was saying that I thought that during the pandemic, shows had started to move earlier. It seemed like 8 p.m. was the new 10 p.m., which is great, but apparently shows are starting to slip later and starting at 11 o'clock again, which is not good for our sleep. I think we got time for one more question? Unless we're done? All right. Thanks everyone for coming. Please download the report from wavelengthmusic.ca or the QR code up here. And stick around for live music. We'll have some time for some chatting, some networking. Head over to the Burr Washroom for some drinks and snacks. And we'll see you after the break.